So in the interest of continuity, we are going to look at, just briefly, Daniel chapter 7. That's Daniel's first vision. Not going to consider for the time being Daniel's interpretation of Nebuchadnezzar's vision back in Daniel 2. But for the purpose of this Daniel chapter 8 video, we are going to look at Daniel chapter 7, also, which he refers to as his first vision, the vision he'd seen formerly. That's going to serve as a little bit of a backdrop as we look at the four horns and the little horns in Daniel chapter 8 on the goat that is warring with the ram. So we're going to start here in verse 7. And Daniel focuses in on this fourth dreadful beast, which gives rise to this little horn in Daniel chapter 7. And it says, "After this I viewed, and behold, a wild beast, a fourth, fearful and utterly astonishing, and its iron teeth, strong eating and making fine, and the rest with its feet it trampled." Okay, so we find out in Daniel chapter 8, the little horn tramples, exceedingly destroys, but not by his own power. And that is what has got Daniel's attention here in Daniel chapter 7, the foundation for the second vision in Daniel chapter 8. So, and this, it was different, this fourth kingdom, from all the other wild beasts. It's interesting to note the other wild beasts have distinguishable characteristics. A lion, a bear, and of course a leopard. And this one is just a rather nondescript, extremely dreadful, terrible beast. It's in fact the beast, the northern army, the exceedingly dreadful northern army mentioned in Jeremiah and other places in Syria to the north of Israel, as Isaiah states, before Daniel ever even has a vision. And notice it has 10 horns down here. Now here's what he focuses on, both here and in Daniel chapter 8. The focus here is the little horn, so he quickly abandons the other horns and the descriptions of them and goes on to spend most of his time describing the actions of the little horn, which are clearly and emphatically at the time of the end in both Daniel chapter 7 and Daniel chapter 8, as we will see even subsequently. "I paid attention to its horns," that is this fourth dreadful kingdom, "and behold, another horn, small or little horn, ascended in the midst of them." It's important to note that when this little horn ascends, the others are already in existence, and this little horn rises up amidst these three horns prior, before it, in local region, which is front of or before denoting rank also. But these horns existed before the other horns. That'll be affirmed later, or before the little horn, rather, rises. "And they were rooted out from in front of it, in fact, by it. And behold, eyes," look here, eyes, the Father showed me this in late 1996, "eyes which were the eyes of a man," the Greek word ophthalmos, the eye metaphorically, the eyes of the mind. This is important. It is the mind's eye. Messiah said, "If thine eye be full of light and whole, then the whole body will be full of light." According to the little horn's own testimony, the reason he became an ophthalmologist, is to study the perception of the mind's eye, or to perceive and understand, quite literally, the mind's eye, the psychology of the eye. I think Bradley saw an interview and dug up that little nugget. So it's the eye, the mind's eye, metaphorically the eye of the mind, or the eyes of the mind, the faculty of knowing. So the answer here is yes. He is not only an ophthalmologist, but he perceives the other people's perceptions and their insights, according to his own testimony, but not before Daniel. "And he had a mouth speaking great and pompous things," as described elsewhere. Now, quickly jumping down into verse 19 and 20, and then we're going to get out of here and move into Daniel chapter 8 and the interpretation of the ram and the goat according to Daniel's own words. And we're going to look at the Septuagint because it reveals, quite frankly, some rather astonishing nuggets that have been there all along. But it is just too simple for words. So we'll just move on and let Daniel's own words iron out any incongruencies. So here he is. Here's the interpretation of the little horn here in Daniel chapter 7. I saw it exactly concerning the wild beast, that is the fourth kingdom, that gives rise to this little horn. Remember, again, the three horns are there before the little horn rises, and then uprooted by the little horn. That was diverse from the other wild beasts, that is the lion, the bear, and the leopard, that preceded this nondescript fourth exceedingly dreadful beast. And its teeth of iron, its fingernails of brass, devouring and making pure or trampling down fine, just pulverizing. The rest with its feet it trampled upon. It just utterly pulverized. He's astonished by the destruction of this little horn that rises up. It rises up again after the three horns exist. And concerning the horns of it, of the 10, of the ones in his head, and of the other one of the ascending and the shaking off of the former three, that horn in which had eyes and a mouth speaking pompous words, and check this out, guys, and the sight, that is to look at, the act of seeing, the appearance or visible form of the little horn was greater or larger than the rest. Mega, great, large. This little horn, this man of sin, the son of perdition, is larger than the rest. This is what the Father showed me in late 1996, early 97, as is affirmed by multiple first-hand eyewitnesses who have also given their testimony publicly regarding that very matter, long before any of it ever came to pass. So he focuses on that little horn, and I say all that to say the three horns existed prior to the little horn rising, and then are subsequently uprooted by the little horn. Amidst all the other horns, the focus and thrust of his vision is the little horn, and that at the time of the end. Note that the interpretation of the vision given by the angel to Daniel, he said vision singular, the whole vision, everything he sees happens at the time of the end. And so, not parts of it, not dual fulfillments as we have erroneously assumed. I did it. Most people do it. It's time to stop doing it. Daniel was clear on the matter. It's at the time of the end. So, here at verse 8, I thought it worthwhile to drop back a little bit. Again, we're using the Apostolic Bible Polyglot. It's a English interlinear translation of the Greek text of the Old Testament, which precedes the Hebrew text of the Tanakh, or the Old Testament. Goats are goats before they have horns. Not all goats even have horns. So the way that a horn develops, it develops after birth. It develops after the goat exists, absolutely. And it indeed develops the horns, and some horns are more prominent than others. And when a horn is broken off, I can testify of this with our own goats. When a horn is broken, it will be replaced by a horn that quite literally pops up below or beneath the other horn. They have what's called a horn bud, and if you're skilled, you can feel for them when they're little bitty, and you can feel them before they even pop up or spring up. You can tell where they're going to develop. So that'll be important as we progress. And the he-goat was magnified. This goat has now defeated the ram. He was magnified exceedingly, and in his being strong was broken the horn, that is the great horn. And there ascended or rose up, look at this, underneath. The location of the horns that rise up are underneath and ascend after the great horn is broken. And underneath, that is to say, underneath, down, under, beneath, under. Could not be clearer. him unto the four winds of heaven. So the four horns rise up beneath the greater horn, the larger horn, and underneath it, and toward the four winds of the heaven. So the four winds of the heaven, but first underneath this large prominent horn. And then in verse 9, and from out of one of them. Now you remember in Daniel chapter 7 verse 8 and Daniel chapter 7 verse 9 and on into 19 and 20, the three had arisen before the fourth horn rises up and were subdued by it, uprooted by it, this fourth one that had risen. So check this out. And from out of one of them, that is these four horns that spring up beneath, under, or below the large horn, and toward the four winds of heaven, but still beneath, under, or below, from out of one of them came forth one strong, and was magnified extremely toward the south, and toward the east, and toward the setting of the sun. Before Daniel ever had a vision in Daniel 7 or Daniel 8, Isaiah and Micah prophesy regarding the Assyrian, king of Babylon, that is to the north, Babylon to the north of Israel, not over in the east, talking about the Babel that Abraham was familiar with. Bab-el in Arabic is the gate or door to God, and it's again a reference to northern Canaan. That's why Daniel in Daniel chapter 11 calls him the willful king of the north. But the constraints that are set upon any vision that Daniel would have in the future are determined by Isaiah and Micah before Daniel even had a vision. So they call him the Assyrian that tramples down our palaces, destroys our cities. That is not only the cities in the land, but with all of his allies, the trampling down the whole earth through the wars that will ensue in the visions that Daniel saw. But again, this is the region, ancient Assyria. Isaiah calls him the Assyrian, from which he will arise. And get a good look at that map. That'll be important as we progress into the rather simple description of the four horns rising up and the little horn rising out of one of them. Again, this is a widely circulated map here. And ancient Assyria, the heart of it. This is at the time of Isaiah. This is what Isaiah would have been familiar with, and Micah. And Micah, it's important to note, also attaches this Assyrians coming, treading down our palaces and our fortified places and our cities, with the ruler, singular ruler, the one head that comes from Bethlehem, the house of bread. So, again, that's some necessary constraints before Daniel ever has a vision. These parameters, these boundaries are set for the rise of the little horn, the man of sin, the son of perdition, son of destruction. And we've learned in Daniel chapter 7, verse 8, that the little horn is larger than his associates. In Daniel chapter 7, verse 8, and Daniel 7, verse 19 and 20, I believe, that the little horn had eyes like the eyes of a man. He had perception or insight into the human mind's eye, is what the Septuagint says, which was fantastic, by the way. And also he had insight into the eyes of a man, ophthalmos. Ophthalmahi is the word in the Greek, ophthalmologist. And so the answer there is yes, and yes for the insight and perception into the human eye, the mind's eye, the psychology of the eye. And of course, he is larger than his associates, with a mouth that speaks pompous, boastful words. And so here in verse 2, I saw in a vision, and it came to pass when I saw that I was in Susa, in the palace, which is in the province of Elam, and I saw, this is in western Iran, east of the contested area in this vision. So he is in the Susa, in the palace or the citadel, in the province of Elam. Now, this region is outside of the contested area again, to the east of it, just as the location of that the goat springs forth, Yavan, in western Anatolia, which is modern-day Turkey, is outside of the region that is going to be that these four horns will be springing up from as well. We also learned in the Septuagint that the four horns spring up beneath, below, or under the large horn when it falls. That is the Ottoman Empire, and that's what's being discussed here in this passage. The Ottoman-Persian Wars, which spanned from the 1600s into the 1900s, which then leads to the rise of what we'll see soon is four more horns. Now check this out. He was in Susa in the palace, which is in the province of Elam, and I saw in a vision, in the vision he's by the river Ule, which is again in western Iran. They're on the border with modern-day Iraq today, down near Kuwait. I lifted my eyes and saw, and behold, there stood before the river a ram, which had two horns, and the horns were high. One of them was higher. One of them was more magnificent, which we find out is the Persians. And the other, the higher one, came up last, or at the end also, by the way, during these Persian-Ottoman wars. I saw the ram pushing westward, northward, and southward. So from where he was in the vision, over in western Iran, the ram pushed westward. Check this out. Westward to push, thrust, gore. Westward and northward. I'm sorry, here we go. Oh, wrong one. Westward. Yam. This is great. Mediterranean Sea, Red Sea, Dead Sea, Sea of Galilee. In other words, west toward the beautiful land, which is the focus of the passage. And couldn't be made clearer both here and in the Septuagint. And northward. Saphon. The word north actually is derived from what's modern-day Jebel al-Akra. The word in Hebrew comes from an earlier word, Mount Sapon or Sapon, in northern Syria, very to the northern extremity, the sides of the north in the Latakia or Latakia, Laodicea district, again to the very north of the North Levant. So, I saw the ram pushing westward, northward, and southward. Look at the word south. Negeb, of course, south country, the dry, crusty region of Judah or Judea. Again, modern-day Israel, which is the focus of Daniel chapter 11, where we have greater Israel versus greater Syria in conflagration with one another in the vision of the king of the north versus the king of the south. And that, of course, at the time of the end as well. So, back here in verse 4, no beast might stand before him, that is the ram, neither was there any that could deliver out of his hand, but he did according to his will, and became powerful or great. I was considering, behold, now all of a sudden a goat, the Septuagint says a goat of the goats. Messiah defines the goat nations as going to the left. The term left, or of the left hand, is actually the word, the phrase balad asham in Arabic, and quite literally, when facing east, one's right hand is to the south, where you get Yamin or Ben Yamin, a son of the right hand, where we get the word Yemen. Again, right hand, and a son of Balad Asham would be of the north country, or the left hand, again, Syria. And I was considering, behold, a he-goat came across from the west. That is, setting place west, westward. Now, the evening sun, as in the setting of the sun, the Septuagint gives us a little bit more insight and squarely places the focus right back on Philistia, or the beautiful land, there, of course, where Israel is today. So, he crosses the face of the earth and touched not the ground, and the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. We learned in the Septuagint that when this horn is broken, 4 horns spring up for it in its place. Literally, beneath, below, or under. And he came to the ram that had the horns, which I had seen standing before the river, and ran unto him in fury of his power. And I saw him come close unto the ram, and he was moved with choler against him, bitterness. And he smote or struck the ram, and brake his 2 horns. Okay, so that's Media and Persia, we're going to find out. There was no power in the ram. These would have been the regions that Daniel was familiar with, by the way. It was the Medes that conquered the Babylonians, and also the Lydia and Egypt. Three ribs spoken of in Daniel chapter 7 in the mouth of the bear. More on that later. And there was no power in the ram to stand before him, but he cast him down to the ground and stamped upon him. There was none that could deliver the ram out of his hand. So this goat tramples down the ram. That's exactly what happened. That was the result of these Persian-Ottoman wars. And of course, the Ottomans dominated the Holy Land until this modern era in the time of the end, when some partitioning took place, which will be very, very clear here shortly. Therefore, the he-goat waxed very great. It was a gigantic empire, the Ottoman, or as some people call the Turkish Empire. And when he was strong, the great horn was broken, and in place of it, again, Septuagint says underneath, below, beneath, and then toward the four winds of heaven, four notable ones toward the four winds of heaven. These four winds of heaven are also beneath the location that the goat comes from. That is Western Anatolia or Turkey. So the four horns are beneath when the large horn breaks and the Ottoman Empire falls. The four horns spring up below, beneath, or under. And that, of course, within the confines of ancient Assyria, as established by Isaiah and Micah in numerous passages before Daniel even had any visions. And out of one of them came forth a little horn. Now we found out again in Daniel chapter 7 that the three horns are uprooted by the little horn. And the three horns came prior to the little horn. Out of one of them waxed exceeding great toward the south. There it is again, to keep it anchored. South country toward Judah, the dry crusty region of Judea, and toward the east and toward the pleasant land. He was shown a singular vision, and then the whole of the vision is interpreted regarding the time of the end and squarely connected to it. The ram which thou saw having horns are Media and Persia, both of them two separate kingdoms, which is also how the scriptures have it aligned. It was the Medes the father stirred up against Babylon. Then at the tail end of it, Persia was actually used by the father and Cyrus to allow some of the Israelites to return to Israel, or the promised land, the beautiful land. And the goat, the rough goat, is the king of Yavan. All right, a son of Japheth, grandson of Noah, Grecia, and of course it's Western Anatolia, and then by extension Greece. And the great horn is between his eyes is the first, or the prominent or preeminent king, Melech. Now that being broken, four stood up for it. In the Septuagint, it reads far more descriptive, by the way. Now that being broken, four stood up for it, or in its place. Four kingdoms. Now the focus switches to the four kingdoms at the time of the end, that is, kingdoms or sovereigns, shall stand up out of that nation, but not with the same power. And in the latter time of their kingdoms, in other words, four kingdoms spring up after the dissolution of this Ottoman Turkish Empire and these Ottoman Turkish wars. These Ottoman Persian wars. When the Ottoman kingdom falls, four kingdoms will spring up out of ancient Assyria, which is why Micah and Isaiah call him the Assyrian, but not with the same power as the Turkish kingdom or empire, Ottoman Empire as a whole. And his power will be mighty, but not by his own power. He will destroy wonderfully and shall prosper and practice. He will destroy mighty and holy people. Through his policy he shall cause craft to prosper in his hand, and he shall magnify himself in his heart. And through shalva, peace, that is quietness, ease, prosperity, security, the cry for security, not peace, that's shalom, but security, he will destroy many.
If it's his policy, you can count on it being deceptive. And through his policy, he shall cause craft to prosper in his hand, and he shall magnify himself in his heart, and by security. It's the word shavah. It's not shalom. It's through security he shall destroy many. He will also take his stand against who? How's that going to fare for him? The Prince of Princes, but he will be broken, though no human could topple him, or without hand.
والأولوية القصوى الآن والتي لا تدانيها أية أولوية هي لاستعادة الأمن الذي نعمنا به لعقود وكان ميزا لنا ليس في منطقتنا فحسب بل على مستوى العالم. وهذا لا يتحقق إلا بضرب الإرهابيين القتلة بيد من حديد.
When transgressors, or your Bible may say when rebels, have come to the full, I like one translation says, when rebels have grown completely wicked, a stern-faced king, a king of fierce countenance. Anybody's Bible say a stern-faced king? A stern-faced king, a king of fierce countenance. His facial features are fierce, and do not forget it. Understanding dark sentences or sinister schemes shall arise or shall stand up. His power will be mighty, but not his own power. He shall destroy wonderfully. He shall prosper and practice, and shall destroy the mighty and also the holy people.
ولا ننسى الأوفياء من أبناء المقاومة اللبنانية الأبطال الذين وقفوا جنبا إلى جنب مع أبطال جيشنا وخاضوا المعارك المشرفة سوية على طرفي الحدود وقدموا الشهداء دفاعا عن محور المقاومة، فتحية لهم ولكل عائلة شهيد منهم. فتحية لهم ولكل عائلة شهيد منهم بادلتنا الوفاء بالوفاء واعتبرت واجب الوقوف مع سوريا كواجب الدفاع عن جنوب لبنان. والشكر أيضا لإيران وروسيا والصين
Again, the four horns that rise up are not present prior to the large horn falling at all. And so, and moreover, three horns, according to Daniel chapter 7, arise prior to the little horn arising out of the fourth horn, which is, so in Daniel chapter 7, we've got three horns, then the little horn rises. And so by the time we get to Daniel chapter 8, we should be looking for the three horns plus another one that rises up, all within ancient Assyria, that are divided after the fall of the Ottoman Empire, which occurred in the early 1900s. In fact, it was the Arab Revolt in around 1916 that ensured the finality and the ultimate end of the Turkish Empire, or the Ottoman Empire. And it was later on, I guess around 23, that Turkey was formed, and three horns within and below, beneath, or underneath Turkey that formed first were Jordan, Iraq, and Lebanon, and then Syria in 1946. There's your four horns. And of course, Israel regathered or named, Father put Israel's name on the map in 1948 to give the world something to hate, despite the fact that Israel is described as his son in the testimony of Moses. We understand that sons are sinful men, and as such, we don't expect it to be a perfect kingdom, and it is not. It has many, many flaws, but it also is wicked to hate Israel, It's wicked to hate our brother, and that's not advisable. So, anyway, this has been a rough shot of Daniel chapter 8.